Pornography addiction is like being stuck inside of a cave, and outside of the cave there's a large dark forest. The forest is scary. You don't know what the forest holds, so you instead just stay at the cave, not knowing what will happen later. But in the immediate, it feels good. But you know that in the long term, you are going to die, and it will be a slow death compared to the quick and merciless one outside. The thing is that our brain cannot see that we are slowly dying here. And if we can show it that, if we can convince it that, hey, going out into the forest, leaving this cave behind, leaving this comfort or stagnancy behind, is actually what will result in our growth, what will result in our happiness and our fulfillment, then it will actually do so because we have convinced it. So what is required to have drastic change, to actually do something about it, to get freedom, is a confrontation of your fears, confrontation of the things that you have repressed, confrontation of yourself. This means primarily an emotional confrontation. Everything that we do is emotional. You may not think about it, but it is. Imagine something as simple as brushing. You don't really enjoy brushing, right? But when someone asks you of its benefits, you say that it keeps me healthy. So that means that you are trying to avoid pain of sickness, right? And you may say something like, it keeps my mouth fresh. So you're saying that you're trying to avoid having a negative impression of people or them trying to leave you, because that will result in isolation, which is of course a negative feeling. Anything and everything that we do has some sort of emotional reason behind it, because it was useful in the days where we were tribal people. But what you need to understand in the modern world is that these emotions which were useful back then are less so right now. So what that means is that you need to see these emotions and actually confront them, actually use some logic on them. Are they being useful to you right now? And if they're not, then you can simply get rid of them. And even the brain wants to get rid of them if they're not being useful. But for that, you first need to question them. Pornography, at its essence, is not a problem of dopamine, because you can easily fix that. Besides, there are plenty of other things which people don't have a hard time quitting, which have a lot of dopamine, like scrolling or YouTube shorts, which again may be hard for some people, but it's more of an impulse problem rather than an emotional one, unless for some people. But that's a whole different story. The point is that your emotional reasons are the primary reason that you use pornography, you use scrolling, you use junk food, you use anything. And especially in things, in drugs or addictions of non-substance related things like pornography or scrolling, we use it primarily for emotional reasons. There is no physical withdrawal telling your body to actually use it. There is nothing like that, and it only exists solely in our mind. There may be some minor headaches or some crap, but you can easily get rid of that. You can easily overcome that. At the end of the day, you need to understand that your emotions are not you. Do this exercise with me. Close your eyes, and for the next 10 seconds, just think, what will my next thought be? You probably had a thought even though you may not have noticed it, like perhaps you started counting, perhaps you got reminded of something which you thought as important or something. But the thing is that you differentiated who your actual self is, which is the observer, compared to the thing which is the emotions or the thoughts. You are not your thoughts, you are not your feelings. They are a part of you, but they are simply something the body does. They are simply something that happens naturally, like your stomach digesting or your heart beating. They are not something which define you, and they are not you. They are not the self, they are not the ego. What you are is the person holding the game controller rather than the person in the video game. I cannot stress this enough that addiction is a mental problem. Addiction, especially pornography addiction and whatnot, are simply problems that you learn. You learn to get addicted. The first time you used, you probably had some sort of fear, some sort of shame behind it, and you slowly started to overcome that. You slowly learned this behavior, so you can easily unlearn it. The three things which make up our mind are our self-limiting beliefs, which are the logical justifications. The thing about these is that we first come up with the emotional reasons for why we won't use something, why we want to do something or not do something, And then we come up with logical reasons when our brain asks us, hey, why are we using this? Is it good? Is it bad? So we can continue to justify it. Or when someone else asks us about it, that is when we start thinking about it. And these reasons, if you actually question them, they turn out to be bullshit. So one thing that people often say is that it improves my concentration, but what actually happens is that you have a small short-term boost of concentration, but at the long term, if you started at 100 and you went to 130, you end up at 90, right? And this is your baseline concentration now without using pornography, because pornography is literally committing self-harm on your brain. So it's not boosting your concentration, it's not increasing your relaxation, because it quite literally increases your cortisol and whatnot. It's not increasing your focus or your mindfulness or your ability to have confidence in front of people or your testosterone. It's not doing any of these things. So how can you say that it's beneficial for you? All of these things are just surface level thoughts which you haven't questioned, and hence why you use them as justifications. When you actually question these thoughts by journaling or meditation or signing up for my course or coaching, you actually start to understand why you're doing this, and that will drastically help you. The last part is our impulse control. The thing is that we have self-limiting beliefs about impulse control, and that also causes us to perform worse than we actually can. There was a study conducted in 2023 about willpower, and it saw that people who believed that willpower was a limited thing performed worse than people who believed that willpower was an unlimited thing. So the only constraints on your willpower, the only constraints on yourself are the ones that you place upon yourself, and you can easily get rid of them. It's like turning on a light switch. This is a learned behavior, much like pornography, much like anything else. Willpower, believing willpower is limited, is simply something that your parents or your friends and whatnot convinced you because they were mediocre and they didn't want to work. Another thing about impulse control is that if you learned bad impulse control, you can easily unlearn it, right? Relating to that, there was a very famous study conducted by a scientist called Ivan Pavlov, who was a very famous psychologist, and what he discovered is that when you take dogs and you ring a bell every time you give them food, they make an association that they have to salivate, they have to release saliva so they can digest food when they see food, right? So every time he gave them food, he rung a bell about 100 to 100 times every time he did that. And the dog learned that every time he gets a food, he will hear the bell. So bell is equals to he can start to salivate, he can start to prepare for food, right? And this is what you've basically taught your brain. You have introduced a needless middleman between your lust and woman, because you think, ooga booga, if I have a lustful thought, that doesn't mean that I go towards women, but instead I go towards pornography, and this can easily be unlearned. People often forget this part of the study, but Pavlov also helped the dog unlearn this behavior. And sure, the dog was a little unhappy about it. He started growling, he started barking, he started whelping and whatnot. But at the end of the day, he got over it, and you will have an easier time because you actually know what's happening with your body. You don't have this discomfort, you don't have to experience this, because you are not your emotions, you are not your impulses, you are the observer. And when you get that, when you understand that, all of these things, all of these reasons you have behind pornography by which the brain justifies it, they will hold minimal power over you, because you have gotten rid of them and you have understood that these emotions, these reasons are not you. Again, I cannot stress this enough. Close your eyes and just think about what it feels like to have an urge. Maybe you will actually get an urge, and just feel it, right? You don't need to act on it, you don't need to do anything. You are not your emotions, not your impulses, just feel it, right? What you will feel is something like a tightness around your throat, or a tightness in your chest, or something like a minor headache, or something else like salivation, or your eyes or pupils dilating. These things are simply just your body having a certain state of being, right? They don't mean anything unless you assign meaning to them. One example I often think of is with public speaking. Two people have the exact same reaction, same bodily reaction before they get onto a stage. Their eyes start dilating, their hands start shaking, they start breathing unevenly, and their heart is beating very fast, right? And so one person sees that and he thinks that, okay, my hands are shaking because I am not prepared. My eyes are dilated because I feel that I'm stressed. My breath is uneven because I want to run away and I'm feeling super stressed or something. Another guy will see that exact reaction and he will think my pupils are dilating so I can connect better with the crowd. My hands are shaking because I'm overflowing with energy. My heart is beating so it can get oxygen and blood faster to my brain and the rest of my body. So my body language, my words, my brain is at top capacity. My breath is uneven so I can get more oxygen in my body and hence to my brain. Same bodily reaction, two very different interpretations, right? So what that starts with is just by seeing the bodily reaction, seeing what the urge means and realizing that it is simply a bodily state, nothing else, nothing more, and whatever meaning you assign to it is the meaning that it holds, much like willpower. Willpower doesn't exist except for in your mind. What actually happens is that you're being mindful and then you're being less mindful because you think, ooga booga, my willpower is running out slowly, and then hence you start acting worse. One partial reason that people develop an addiction is because they do not understand nor have a healthy relationship with their stress system. So what that means is that our tribal ancestors, they felt genuinely stressed when they had to deal with a lion or some crap, or they had to deal with another tribe attacking them, and that meant that they had to either fight or flight, or they could try to be nice to the other tribe or whatever, and so those were the only options that they had, right? But what you need to understand is that these fight and stress systems are not evolved for the modern day. They are designed for short-term use. They are designed for sprinting and then running away and then just calming down and then moving on. What we have in the modern day is akin to constantly having a little bit of stress in your daily lives because you have 20, 40, 50 different tasks to take care of compared to something else, something basic like ooga booga, get wife, flower, take meat home, feed children, slap them around. You're getting the point, right? So there's a very simple way that our previous stress systems were aligned, right? And these aren't as complex, these aren't designed for our current life. So what you need to do is put things in their place. Because when you stress about things, you actually end up performing worse, micro stressing that is. And what you need to understand is that so a lot of the things that you're dealing with don't really require that level of stress, don't really require this constant micro stressing, which actually worsens your body. So that means that let's say you got stressed out by let's say your teacher screaming at you, you getting in an argument with your parents or your wife or your girlfriend or your boss, anything, right? And that means that you are stressed about it. So what people tend to do is that they want to get rid of the stress reason, and generally for our ancestors what worked was quite literally running away. And what you're trying to do is run away from the feelings, run away from the stress, which quite literally meant the same thing as running away from the problem back then. But right now, when you run away from the stress, you do not solve the problem which is causing you stress, right? So that means that you need to understand how your stress systems work, and maybe when your wife or whatever else are arguing with you, you just need to understand that, okay, I'm in this situation right now. Things still aren't as bad because I am alive, I have a house, I have food, I am quite literally doing very well. I don't need to worry about all of these things, right? And so when you do that, when you put things into perspective, when you have a little bit of gratitude, which is one of the biggest things people use to treat anxiety and depression, you will of course end up performing better. Developing this ability to see stress means that we need to have mindfulness. We need to have a level of impulse control. We need to have a middleman and ask ourselves a question immediately when we get an urge or an impulse or stress that, okay, am I really being threatened right now, or is this just a bodily reaction? Is this just something which is happening right now and it doesn't really mean that much? When you start asking yourself that, of course you will be less stressed, you will end up performing better because you're not constantly micro stressing, and you will of course go to pornography less. If you want to get my coaching and everything else, there's the link in the description, and cheers.